What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be countering one of my recent videos where I talked about 5 things that Battlefield 6 needs, and today we are going to be talking about 5 things that I think Battlefield 6 really needs to avoid. If you haven't seen that first video, then be sure to go and check that one out, and if you are new around here, then be sure to subscribe to the channel with those notifications on, as there is plenty more Battlefield content on the way. But with that being said, let's get stuck right into it. So the first thing that I think Battlefield 6 really needs to avoid, and this is arguably the most important thing on this list, is skill-based matchmaking. Skill-based matchmaking, or SBMM, has become one of the biggest talking points in shooters over the last 3 to 5 years, as Call of Duty is obviously focused pretty heavily on SBMM with their multiplayer and even with Warzone to some extent, and to some people it really hurt their experience with the game. Now, on paper, SBMM is actually the fairest way to go about it when you actually think about it. You're placed in lobbies with players of your own skill level, everyone's on a relatively even playing field, and in all fairness it does often result in some pretty competitive, closely fought out games, which I'm sure a lot of people do really like. The other thing that's been made clear from Call of Duty is that it does actually help with a lot of the player retention across the entire game, as those lower level, less experienced players aren't getting shit on all day every day. So instead of buying the game, playing it for a week and then getting sick of just getting beaten every single game, those players are kind of all playing against each other, resulting in everyone doing decent enough that they're still enjoying the game. At the lower levels it works, and I think it's probably a good thing to some extent, but at the mid to higher levels of the game it's almost punishing you for being good at the game, when some people just want to casually jump on with their friends and have some relaxing games, rather than having to sweat their dick off just to get a single kill. Battlefield has avoided SBMM entirely, at least as far as we know, and in my opinion it hasn't hurt the game whatsoever, as it's still just as much fun as it has ever been, and when you play Call of Duty for a few hours then switch over to Battlefield, it just feels so much more enjoyable, because not everyone is a pro esports competitor and everyone can just play the game however they want to. I honestly think that the day SBMM is introduced into Battlefield, it will be the day that the franchise truly loses its battle to Call of Duty. They need to do things differently to Call of Duty if they want to be its main competitor, and if they just fall into the same trap that COD has, then that won't help the franchise whatsoever. Battlefield is a large-scale, open, sandbox type of shooter, and it's so unique from pretty much every other shooter out there, and I think the casual, less sweaty aspect of Battlefield is what most people love about it, as everyone is still competitive and trying to win and play the objective without every single player needing to be exactly the same skill level. Now, the next thing I think they need to avoid in the upcoming Battlefield game is vehicle dominant maps. Battlefield 5 had honestly the worst maps of any Battlefield that I've ever played, and it seems like most people probably feel pretty much the same, and in my opinion a lot of that was because the maps were designed in a way that a single tank or a plane could pretty much dominate an entire section of the map on its own. Battlefield 3 and 4 nailed this in my opinion. The vehicles were really good in that game, but because of the way the maps were designed, there was more often than not a way to survive against those vehicles if you did play your cards right. Most of the maps had a lot more verticality and a lot more buildings to take cover in, so when a tank came rolling by, sure, it could still kill you if you weren't proactive about it, but if you knew what you were doing, you could often just completely avoid that vehicle and essentially just outsmart them and outmaneuver them, resulting in some much fairer gameplay overall. Now, on certain maps in Battlefield 5, however, there were literally sections of the map where if you don't have a vehicle and the enemy team does, then you almost had a 0% chance of survival without even being close to the enemy tank or plane, because they could literally snipe you from 500 meters away since the maps were so much more open, and it did sometimes get very frustrating. The thing is, I don't think the vehicles themselves were actually overpowered. I think the maps were designed poorly to where they really shined, as a map like, say, Rotterdam for example, the tanks just weren't OP at all on that map, since there's a lot more cover nearby and a lot of verticality to where you can take cover and hide from a tank if it is nearby. On a map like Panzerstorm or Hamada though, tanks were just borderline invincible, since they can snipe you from pretty much the other side of the map and there's no cover to allow you to get close to them and take them out. So in my opinion, it actually wasn't a vehicle problem, it was actually a map problem. And that's something that I hope they really do fix in the next installment to the franchise. Moving on, the next thing I hope they avoid is the use of those sort of overly realistic animations, stuff like slowly climbing into a car or slowly mantling a half wall and stuff like that. And sure, it looks really good and it adds to the realism and immersion, but that shouldn't be the focus of the game. This one might sound like a little bit of nitpicking, and to be honest it probably is, but one thing I really hate in any multiplayer game is when I press a button to do something and it takes 2 to 3 seconds to actually do that action. If I'm pinned down and my only escape is to get into a nearby tank or a car and escape that area, then when I go up to that vehicle and try and get in, I expect it to be pretty much instantaneous like it used to be in the older Battlefield games. There's nothing worse than trying to get into a car in the heat of battle and you're just sort of stuck in this 2-second animation only to die because you can literally no longer actually control your character during that animation, when in most other games it's just an instant action. Like I said, it does definitely add to the realism, and I do understand that Battlefield has always gone for that sort of small increase in realism compared to the likes of COD or pretty much any other popular shooter, but that shouldn't come at the cost of an enjoyable experience. Imagine if when you press the button to reload it takes 2 seconds before the character starts to reload, or if you try and shoot but it takes 2 seconds for the bullets to actually start shooting. That's really not that much different than these animations getting in the way of the action that I'm trying to do when I press a button to get into a vehicle. And most of the time it's obviously fine, but when it does cause a death or when you're 2 seconds late to revive a teammate, that honestly does start to ruin the experience. It's definitely not the biggest of issues, to be completely honest, but I just want a smooth, responsive, fluid Battlefield game like Battlefield 3 and 4, and I think getting rid of those type of animations would definitely help in that area. Now, the next thing on the list, and I actually have a video coming on this topic next week, is that I think they really need to avoid spending too much time and resources on a BR mode if they do end up making one, which all reports suggest that they definitely are. I love BR games, I love Warzone, and I think a Battlefield BR would be absolutely unreal if it were done properly, learning from all the mistakes of Firestorm and stuff like that, but I really don't want that to come at the cost of the regular Battlefield that we know and love. In my opinion, Warzone has actually affected Call of Duty multiplayer quite a bit, and I personally don't really care whatsoever because Call of Duty just hasn't been the same for many years now, and I love Warzone enough that I'm willing to take that sacrifice, but I think Battlefield as a franchise still has a lot of potential, and even if their BR mode was the best game ever made, I know that I'd still want to play regular multiplayer quite a bit. During these crazy times of COVID and everything else, I just don't know if any company can actually make a 9 out of 10 base game as well as a 9 out of 10 BR as well. I think one of those has to take a hit, and if the BR mode is successful and it really is a competitor to Warzone, I just don't want them to kind of abandon regular Battlefield in the same way that regular Call of Duty has somewhat been left behind. If they're gonna definitely focus on both, then I just hope that they are willing to spend the money and hire enough developers that they can really nail both areas of the game. Even if the BR is bigger and better than Warzone and successful to years to come, but it comes at the cost of the base game not being all that great, then I'd honestly still consider that an L for the franchise, and I just don't want to see Battlefield drop off the map after a few rough games in a row. Now, the last thing on this list is a pretty obvious one, and I did kind of touch on this in the previous video, but I think the most important thing that Battlefield 6 needs to avoid is another launch fiasco like we had with Battlefield 5. The trailer was absolutely terrible. The higher-ups were making comments to their fans that you just really should not be making, and honestly the launch of Battlefield 5 was just an all-around disaster, and one that I'm sure they probably don't want to experience ever again. I think for the franchise to correct itself and get back on the right track, it needs to hit the ground running with this game and really show the world that Battlefield is back and it's here to stay for years to come. No matter how good the game actually is, a failed launch could see a lot of problems down the line, similar to what we saw with Battlefield 5 and even Battlefront 2, where the game did turn around quite a bit and it was nothing like its launch version, yet the damage had already been done, and within a couple of years the game was no longer financially viable because people had moved on so early, and the only players left playing were the absolute hardcore fans. Every game needs a healthy, casual player base to support those hardcore players, and if the game has a rough launch or just has drama surrounding the game like the last one, then I do honestly think that will cause many issues down the line that I just don't think any of us want to see. So that is going to do it for this one, guys. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think they need to avoid, or whether you agree or disagree with anything on my own list. I'm very keen to hear what you guys have to say. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.